Hey guys, tonight we drift into the warm, dry hush of the Sahara, under a velvet black sky dusted with stars so bright they feel almost too close. The wind kicks up just a little, whispering across dunes older than cities, older than memory. And somewhere out there, in the space between starlight and sand, you hear the beginning of a name, not shouted, not sung, just spoken low and slow like a prayer or a prophecy. Mansa Musa. You've heard the name before. Maybe you read somewhere that he was the richest man who ever lived. Maybe you heard about the caravan that broke Egypt's economy. Maybe you heard whispers of Timbuktu and gold-dusted streets. But what you probably haven't done is live it. That's what we're going to do tonight, so before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is right now. I love seeing this community stretch across time zones like a map of mellow wanderers. Now dim, the lights maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The year is somewhere around 1280. You're in the Empire of Mali, west of the Niger River, and far from anything marked on most European maps. You're walking through morning haze into a village of red earth homes. The air smells of millet porridge and wood smoke. This is not yet a grand empire. Not yet. But you can feel something shifting underfoot, a low hum like the earth warming itself before a fire. You pass young Musa as a boy, thin-limbed, observant. He's not wearing gold, not yet. His tunic is plain dyed in deep indigo. His eyes are watchful. He's the kind of kid who doesn't ask a lot of questions out loud, but remembers everything. His father, Faga Lay, is a local noble, a respected man, but not yet part of the imperial dynasty. Musa grows up not in palaces, but in dusty compounds shaded by acacia trees. He learns from storytellers, from smiths, from quiet old men who chew cola nuts and speak in riddles. You learn with him. You watch traders roll in from faraway lands. Tuareg from the north, their camels burdened with salt. Soninka merchants from the south, whispering of gold fields that glint under riverbanks. The village may be humble, but its crossroads are rich with rumor. And it's here long before kingship that Musa first hears the stories of Mecca, of the Hajj, of the long road east where prophets walked and paradise was promised. He listens wide-eyed as travelers speak of cities that shine with marble, of scholars who memorize entire libraries, of rivers that smell like musk and bread. He is maybe 10 years old when he first whispers, "Someday I will go." Nobody laughs, because there's something about him, even as a boy, that makes the impossible sound inevitable. Musa grows, and so does Mali. The empire isn't new, but it's still gathering its bones. It stretches from the Atlantic coast toward the edge of the Sahara, held together not by brute force, but by trade and tribute. Cities like Niani and Gao hum with marketplaces. The rulers like Sunjata Keita before him have laid the groundwork for something vast, something golden. And young Musa, he studies. He learns the Quran from clerics in mud-brick mosques. He watches court proceedings from behind woven reed screens. He traces trade routes on hides. And at night, he lies awake and stares at the stars. Those same stars you're staring at now, maybe, and wonders how many of them lead east. Here's a mainstream fact to carry in your pocket. The Mali Empire in the 13th and 14th centuries was one of the wealthiest and most powerful in the world. It thrived on gold. Some historians estimate Mali was producing nearly half of the world's gold at one point, and it was structured around systems of tribute trade caravans and Islamic governance. But here's a fringe little tidbit. It wasn't just the gold in the ground that made Mali rich. It was the people, the traders who knew. 400 miles of roots by heart. The griots who carried law and lineage in song. The women who managed household markets. The iron workers whose forges were half industry, half ritual. Historians still argue whether Musa's wealth should be measured in coins or influence, whether he was simply lucky to rule during Mali's peak, or whether his own vision stretched the empire wider than it had ever dared. You're going to form your own opinion on that soon enough. For now, just sit with young Musa in the shade. Watch him watch the horizon. Listen to him hum old songs while sweeping sand off stone steps. You're not in the middle of history yet, but the story's heartbeat is getting louder. You wake with the sun already climbing the air, dry and warm, a dust-laced breeze nudging you into movement. The scent of millet porridge lingers, but it's the hum of a distant drumbeat that pulls you from your woven mat. You rise, stretch, and step out into the wide ochre-colored compound of Niani, the capital of the Mali Empire, and the place young Musa will one day call his seat of power. Right now, though, it's not his. It belongs to another, the current Mansa, the king whose court pulses with clamor. Traders pour in from every direction, north, south, east, west, each bringing word of distant lands and goods, exotic enough to seem mythical. Ivory from the forests, salt carved from the Sahara, gold pulled from veins deep beneath the earth. The empire is alive, and you walk through it barefoot in its dust. This is not a place of palaces and marble. Mali's power is in its reach. Its arteries are its roads. Caravans stretch across the landscape like veins carrying commerce, religion, stories. The Niger River bends and curves through the land like a second spine feeding fields of rice, millet, and sorghum. Along its banks, people wash clothes, trade fish, exchange news. You make your way toward the market. It bustles noisy, fragrant, colorful. Women in layered fabrics of russet ochre and indigo arrange dried dates, folded textiles, and clay pots. Men squat in shade, playing games with pebbles. You pass a griot under a baobab tree, reciting family lineages with a voice that sounds older than the bark above him. You pause. You listen. This is the world young Musa learns from. It teaches through experience, repetition, gesture. No textbooks, just memory and rhythm. Mainstream historians often describe the Mali Empire in terms of territory stretching over 400,000 square miles at its height. But its real strength isn't just size, it's structure. Vassal kingdoms send tribute to the Mansa. Governors called Farbas rule distant provinces. Tax collectors line the riverbanks and caravan routes. Mali works like a well-kept loom complex, interconnected, surprisingly fluid. And yet, for all its infrastructure, it's held together by something harder to measure respect. The Mansa isn't just a ruler. He's a steward of justice, a symbol of divine order, and a living memory of the empire's founder, Sunjata Keita. Musa, like every young noble, hears Sunjata's name almost daily. His victories are recited like scripture. His laws are quoted during disputes. You visit a courtroom, open-air shaded, filled with long benches. A dispute over grazing rights is underway. A young man accuses his neighbor of letting goats wander into his millet field. Elders deliberate. No one yells. They reference the Kurukan Fuga Mali's oral constitution established by Sunjata generations ago. The verdict is reached not through dominance, but tradition. Consensus, not command. This is the Mali Empire, strong, yes, but not a clenched fist. More like a palm open, flexible, capable of holding everything from prayer beads to sword hilts. You follow Musa through his adolescent years. He learns diplomacy by watching it. He sees how disputes are calmed, how alliances are reinforced by marriage, trade, and ceremony. He begins to understand how power isn't just about wealth. It's about knowing when to speak, when to listen, and when to give before taking. Here's a quirky detail you might not find in most textbooks. The Malian court sometimes used poetry competitions to resolve disputes of pride between nobles. A well-timed verse could soothe an insult better than an apology. Historians still argue whether Mali's vastness made it ungovernable or whether it was Musa's eventual leadership that wove it into tighter cohesion. What's clearer is this: before he ever becomes Mansa Musa is watching, always watching, from corners of courtyards, from behind palace drapes, from the edge of every story. One evening you sit beside him, under a sky gone deep violet. The stars bloom one by one. Musa points out the brightest just above the horizon. "That one rises where Mecca is," he says. You nod, though you're not quite sure if he means literally or spiritually. Either way, the longing in his voice is real. He's no longer a boy. He's a young man, curious and capable, walking that space between being someone's son and being someone's story. And the empire, it's a kingdom wrapped in dust and wealth, ambition and silence, waiting for the next breath of wind to shift its sands. You lie back, you breathe with it, and the stars keep rising. You wake to footsteps, not loud, not hurried, just firm, purposeful, a sound that carries weight without noise. You open your eyes and find yourself standing beneath a woven canopy in the capital Niani. But the mood is different. The air hums with something unspoken. Around you, messengers move quickly. Soldiers polish iron spearheads without talking, and in the distance a horn sounds low and steady. This is not ceremony, it's change. You feel it before you understand it. A death has occurred. A seat has emptied, and power, that elusive, glowing thing, is shifting. The Mansa Sakura, the ruler of Mali, after a brief and somewhat controversial rise, has died. Not peacefully, not in bed. He never made it back from a voyage he was never supposed to return from. Depending on who you ask, he was either overthrown, assassinated, or simply vanished on the sea. He was ambitious. Some say too ambitious. Others say he tried to cross the Atlantic. Historians still argue whether he was searching for trade routes or escape, but either way, he's gone. And into that gap the elders gather. You walk among them, their heads bowed in thought, their robes heavy with history. They speak in low tones, weighing not just lineage, but loyalty. Who among the nobles is steady? Who understands trade and Islam? Who commands both fear and affection? And then a name is spoken: Musa. Not shouted, just floated into the center like a leaf dropped into still water. You feel the ripple. Musa, who until now has been known mostly as the king's deputy, the quiet listener, the faithful manager of affairs during Sakura's long absences, is summoned. He bows. He doesn't protest. He doesn't exclaim. He nods, says a prayer, and steps into the seat. You watch as he becomes Mansa Musa, ruler of the Mali Empire, lord of goldfields, and river routes, holder of trade and truth and throne. Mainstream accounts describe this moment as almost accidental. Musa reportedly said that he had been appointed deputy because Sakura had no intention of returning from his voyage. When the voyage ended in disappearance, Musa was next in line. But here's a quieter truth: he was ready. He'd been watching, remembering, preparing. His hands had already held the threads of Mali's economy, its religious leaders, its trade networks. When he takes the throne, there is no panic, only pivot, as if the land itself had been waiting for his feet to step forward. You witness his first days as Mansa. He meets with governors, not to demand allegiance, but to listen. He visits scholars, not to command them, but to understand them. He sends messages to distant provinces, not with declarations, but with gifts. He knows the cost of loyalty is not fear, it's continuity. He doesn't dress in gold, not yet. He wears indigo, still deep and calm. But now his words carry weight. When he speaks, men turn. When he walks through the market, it falls momentarily quiet. Not from fear, from recognition. Something has changed. Here's a quirky little detail for you. In the coronation rituals of Mali, it's believed that the Mansa was symbolically buried and reborn, taken into a sacred grove, given new names, new responsibilities, and return to the world as more than a man, a vessel, a voice of order. Whether Musa experienced that literal right is uncertain, but you see it in how he moves, as if part of him no longer belongs entirely to himself, as if part of him is already myth. Historians still debate whether Musa's rise was seamless or politically turbulent. Records are thin, but you see what matters: he rose without bloodshed, without a scramble for power, and that is rare in any empire. You walk beside him in the evening as he visits a mosque. The call to prayer echoes across the courtyard. He kneels, forehead to earth. No crown, no throne, just woven mat and whispered verses. This is the core of it: faith and duty wrapped together, stitched tight. You leave the mosque and wander the streets. Mali breathes around you, families eating by oil lamp, scribes copying texts, camels resting by the well. Nothing flashy, nothing explosive, just a kingdom steadying itself beneath new hands. And you feel it, that whisper of a future so golden it could blind. But Musa isn't rushing. He's planting, listening, waiting for the right moment to rise, not with a sword, but with a vision. You walk beside him, your feet matching his steps. And above you, the desert stars wheel slowly over the empire he's just begun to guide. You wake before the sun does, stirred by the sound of slow footsteps padding through morning dust. Mansa Musa walks ahead of you, robes wrapped loosely around him, his breath visible in the cool air. It's quiet, the kind of quiet that feels like thinking, the kind that settles in your ribs and waits. You follow him into the foothills beyond Niani, where the land rolls gently and the ground glitters not with dew, but with dusted flecks of something far older and far more valuable: gold. Not nuggets, not coins, just the shimmer of potential beneath your feet. This is where the true story begins, not in marble halls or royal palaces, but in the red-brown belly of the earth. Mali's wealth doesn't arrive in wagons from the outside. It grows here. It's mined by hand, carried in pouches, refined over coals. It flows into the empire like a river without banks, and Musa, newly seated on the throne, knows exactly what he's inherited: gold in the ground, but also stories in the air. You follow him through a mining village. Children chase chickens between straw huts. Women stir pots over smoky fires, and behind them men and boys climb into the open mouths of the earth shafts reinforced with wooden braces and hope. They descend without fanfare. It's not glamour, it's grit. And this is the empire's pulse. Here's a mainstream fact: the Mali Empire sat atop some of the richest goldfields in the known world, particularly the Bambouk and Bure regions. These mines weren't worked with machines. They were powered by generations of knowledge: when to dig, when to rest, how to read the color of soil like scripture. But here's a lesser-known tidbit. The word Mali itself is thought by some scholars to mean where the king lives, or hippopotamus, depending on dialect and region. Either way, it suggests presence, weight, a place where something stays. You sit with the miners at midday, sharing water from a gourd. The talk is casual, rhythmic, but you hear it how they speak of Musa, not as a distant ruler, but as the one who listens, the one who remembers their names. That's Musa's genius. He wraps his authority in familiarity. He doesn't rule from above. He rules from within. Back in the capital, he holds court not to dazzle, but to strategize. Trade with the north caravans of salt cloth copper requires delicate balancing. Gold makes Mali desirable, but it also makes it a target. So Musa creates stability by myth. He invites griots, oral historians, to tell tales of Mali's unbroken power, its chosen lineage. He funds mosques to align spiritual legitimacy with rule. He names roads not after himself, but after ancestors, Sunjata Mari Jata, the empire's roots. In doing so, he becomes not just king, but continuation. He also watches the world beyond his borders. Envoys from North Africa arrive, merchants from the Maghreb, even emissaries from Andalusia, and each time Musa asks them questions, not about wealth, but about learning. What cities do they know? What books do they read? Who are their scholars? Historians still argue whether Musa could read Arabic. Some say yes. Others believe he had it read to him. What's clear is this: he valued knowledge, and he understood its power. You see it in how he funds teachers, how he expands libraries, how he sets aside land, not for hunting but for study. And yet all of this, the gold, the governance, the growth, is just the groundwork. Because late one night, as he walks the courtyard in silence, Musa stops, looks east, and says, "To no one in particular, I will go to Mecca." The words fall heavy, not because its unusual pilgrimage is expected of Muslims with means, but because he means it, and not just a quiet caravan either. He's thinking of something bigger, grander, a demonstration. You sit with that thought for a while, a pilgrimage, but not just for piety, a move on the global chessboard, a moment that would plant Mali's name in every corner of the Islamic world, a journey of gold, of spectacle, of presence. But not yet. First, he must prepare. He commissions more coinage, rebuilds roads, expands his household guard. He even sends scouts ahead to map watering holes and locate safe passage. And all the while, the gold keeps flowing. From ground to furnace, from furnace to ingot, from ingot to destiny. You're up before the sun again, but this time there's noise. Purposeful noise. The kind that rattles through courtyards and wakes even the laziest roosters. Footsteps, hammer taps, quiet commands, spoken just above a whisper. You pull back the flap of your tent and step into a world being built in real time. Because today, the mosques are humming, the scholars are writing, and the empire's center of gravity is shifting from gold to grace. This is the part of the story where Musa, Gold King of Mali, becomes something more than just a rich man. He becomes a patron of learning, a sponsor of silence and study, a Mansa with one hand in the treasury and the other resting gently on the Quran. You follow him down a narrow corridor of the capital's mosque, the mud walls cool from night air, the floor swept clean of dust. Inside you see rows of men bent over thick, parchment-colored scrolls reciting lines under their breath. The room smells like old ink, dried leather, and morning breath. And yet it feels like magic. Musa nods respectfully to each teacher as he passes. These are not men of war, not traders or guards. These are preservers, the keepers of hadith, the experts in fiqh, the reciters of stories handed down over centuries. And Musa treats them as vital to his reign as his generals. He doesn't build his empire solely on gold. He builds it on memory. Mainstream historians credit Musa with transforming Mali into a major Islamic cultural center. Under his rule, cities like Timbuktu and Gao attracted scholars from across North Africa and the wider Islamic world. Libraries were established. Schools flourished. Legal systems rooted in Sharia law became more widely practiced. But here's something a little off the usual radar. There are oral traditions that claim Musa memorized dozens of Quranic surahs and was known to correct reciters who stumbled during public prayer. Was this legend? Possibly. But the consistency of the tale across regions suggests a deeper truth. Musa didn't just fund religion, he practiced it. You sit with him on a low mat one afternoon as he listens to a visiting scholar from Cairo. The scholar speaks of astronomy, of stars that move in elegant, predictable dance, and how time can be measured not just by the moon, but by shadow. Musa listens, then asks about calendars, prayer times, zakat calculations. He's not asking for entertainment. He's asking to apply knowledge. You realize he's curating not just wealth, but function. Back in the city, you help organize books. Stacks of them, some in Arabic, some in Songhai, some in hybrid dialects you can't even name. They're bound in goat leather and decorated with faint golden flourishes. Not showy, just sacred. One student no older than 14 tells you he's learning law, trade math, and classical poetry at the same time. You ask him why. He shrugs and says, "So I can be useful to the empire." You nod, impressed. Then the muezzin calls for prayer, and everyone pauses. A stillness drops over the courtyard like a clean cloth. You kneel beside Musa. This is a different kind of power. It doesn't shine like gold or clash like swords. It moves quietly through minds, reshaping them like rivers do banks. Historians still debate whether Musa's religious devotion was primarily spiritual or political. Did he fund scholars to appease the ulama, or because he truly believed that knowledge was the highest form of worship? You're beginning to see that the line doesn't matter much. His actions are what built the legacy. Later that week, a caravan arrives. Not military, not trade, just scribes and scholars. They've heard of Musa's support. They've traveled for weeks. One carries a text copied from Al-Andalus. Another brings scrolls from Tunis. They've come to study, to share, to stay. Musa welcomes them not with ceremony, but with a simple meal. Rice, dates, honey, water. They eat cross-legged under a tree, as birds chirp blissfully, unaware they're sitting on the edge of history. Here's a quirky fact. Some documents from this era, copied centuries later, still carry scribes' notes like completed during Mansa Musa's reign, as if his rule itself made the paper holy. The era was golden, not only in wealth, but in reputation. That night, as torches flicker and stars scatter overhead, Musa walks the mosque's edge in quiet reflection. You're with him. He doesn't speak, but you sense what's building inside him. Faith is not a destination, it's a direction, and he's facing east, always east, towards something sacred, towards something next. By now, you don't need the muezzin to wake you. Your body rises with the hush of pre-dawn activity, instinctively tuned to the rhythm of the empire. But today, there's something different in the air, something charged. You step outside into the half-light and feel it almost like a drumbeat beneath your feet. Today is the day Mansa Musa sets his sights on Mecca, not just in spirit, not just in longing, but in a tangible, logistical, glittering plan. You trail behind him as he walks through the palace's long, open courtyard. He doesn't announce it. He doesn't unfurl banners. He simply says it aloud to a group of advisors mid-meeting. It is time. I will make the Hajj. Simple words, monumental implications, because when Musa makes a move, he does not travel light. The court leans in. Scribes immediately begin sketching outlines of routes. Traders whisper of desert dangers. Armories inventory iron-tipped spears. Artisans start preparing gifts. Scrollwork, ivory, carved gourds, dyed robes, and above all gold. So much gold. You watch the machinery of empire come alive. Mainstream accounts agree on the overwhelming scale of Musa's pilgrimage, one of the most extravagant religious journeys in human history. The numbers are debated. But here's a commonly cited version: 60,000 people, dozens of camels carrying hundreds of pounds of gold each, tens of thousands of servants, heralds dressed in embroidered silks, entire towns that seem to move with him. But here's the catch. Musa doesn't just want to go to Mecca. He wants to make sure everyone knows he went. You sit beside him that evening as he watches torches flicker across the city. Let them see Mali, he says softly. Let them feel it in their streets, in their markets. Let them hear our name in their prayers. This isn't ego, it's strategy. Musa knows that in the wider Islamic world, Mali is a footnote at best, a distant kingdom, whispered about along spice routes. But if he shows up with gold, with scholars, with thousands moving as one, he becomes unforgettable. So the planning begins in earnest. You help coordinate the caravans. Every detail matters. The route will stretch across the Sahara, hot, perilous, and punishing. There must be water, shelter, security. Musa dispatches scouts weeks ahead to inspect oases and negotiate local passage rights. In cities like Tahaza, known for its salt mines, he stations advanced teams to stock supplies. You oversee camel training. Yes, training. These animals aren't just pack beasts, they're lifelines. Each one gets familiar with its handler, its burden, its pace, and they carry more than goods. They carry gold pressed into bars, packed into leather bags, wrapped in cloth, guarded every step of the way. Here's a quirky little detail. Musa reportedly gave gold dust as alms to beggars in every town he passed through, not coins, dust, because coinage would tie him to specific dynasties and currency systems. Dust is universal. Historians still argue about the exact impact of this generosity. Some say Musa's actions destabilized economies, especially in Egypt, where his spending caused inflation for over a decade. Others suggest it was less about damage, more about awe. Either way, it worked. You visit the tailors, fabrics in saffron, teal, indigo, embroidered tunics, leather sandals for hundreds, parasols stitched with silver thread. They are not dressing a caravan. They are designing spectacle. Musa ensures there will be prayer circles along the route, led by imams he personally selects. He organizes legal debates, storytelling nights, Quran recitations. This isn't a journey, it's a moving civilization. And then there are the gifts. Boxes and crates of gold, objects, bracelets, rings, carved figurines, gilded Qur'an's gold-dusted manuscripts. You see one box labeled simply, "For the Sultan of Cairo." The diplomacy has already begun. One advisor leans over to Musa and asks, "Will it be dangerous?" Musa replies, "Of course, that's how you know it's worth doing." And in that moment you understand the deeper truth. This pilgrimage isn't just about faith. It's a reputation campaign, a declaration, a branding effort that will ripple across the Islamic world. You lie beneath the stars again that night, listening to the low sounds of preparations, the sharpening of tools, the counting of loads, the soft repetition of travel prayers. And just before you drift off, you hear Musa's voice in the dark. Let the world see what Allah has made possible. And it begins. The first morning of the journey feels like the beginning of a dream that everyone agreed to believe at once. You stand on the ridge outside the city of Niani, watching the procession gather like a slow-moving tide. Camels groan under the weight of their packs. Drummers test rhythms on goatskin djembe. The sky itself seems to pause, waiting. Then Musa appears. He's not on a golden chariot or flanked by lions. He rides a modest horse, clothed in fine but simple fabrics. Still, everyone sees him, not just with their eyes, but with their breath. Because in this kingdom, the ruler is more than a man. He's a moving story. The caravan begins to move, and you with it. At first, the pace is slow, cautious. The outer roads are smooth, the weather kind, but you know it won't last. The Sahara awaits, and it doesn't care about royal titles. The procession slinks like a great beast, camels, carts, men, women, children, horses, goats, scholars, singers, guards. Some days it stretches farther than you can see. Each night, tents are pitched in organized circles. Fires glow. Food is prepared. And through it all, Musa holds court not in marble halls, but beneath the stars, speaking with merchants and mystics alike. One evening he calls you to sit with him and a group of traveling poets. They share verses about the journey, about faith, about wind. One recites a line that makes Musa pause. "To know the desert you must forget your name." He repeats it, then laughs. "We'll see how long I last then." You keep walking. The Sahara is brutal. You taste the sand before you see it blown by hot winds that scour skin and silence conversation. Camels stumble. Waterskins are guarded like treasure. People stop talking about distance. They talk about survival, yet still you move. Historians often speak of Musa's passage across the Sahara like it was a stroll through the dunes. But if you've ever walked the edge of a salt flat with a cracked lip and a sun-drunk brain, You know better. Here's a fun, strange tidbit. In some parts of the desert, to ward off spirits believed to haunt travelers, griots told stories backward at night. They said it confused the ghosts. You try it. It doesn't help your sleep, but it makes Musa laugh. Along the way, people join the caravan traders hoping to ride the protection of the king pilgrims, inspired by the sight of a Muslim ruler in motion. Whole villages send offerings, dates, cloth, songs. The caravan grows. You reach the city of Walata, an oasis of color after so much sand. Market stalls overflow. Children run barefoot across the stones. Musa holds court in a shaded square and gifts gold to the imam. It's not performative, it's tradition. A ruler honors his faith by uplifting those who guard it. The people cheer not just because he gives, but because he listens. He asks questions about trade, about irrigation, about poetry. He writes none of it down, but you know he remembers. And that's when you notice this journey isn't changing Musa. It's revealing him. He is not just a king on pilgrimage. He's a mirror. Those who look at him see faith or power or wealth or possibility, whatever they most long to believe in. He reflects it, multiplies it, sends it forward like a ripple. You pass a well tended by elderly women, their hands calloused, their eyes sharp. One calls out, "Tell the sands to be kind, King Musa." He stops his horse, lifts his palm, and says, "The sands do not listen to kings, but perhaps they listen to grandmothers." The women howl with laughter. You move on. At night, you dream of heatless stars and shifting dunes, of birds flying nowhere, of a voice soft and certain that keeps whispering, "Keep walking." And when you wake, the desert is still around you. But so is the caravan. Still moving, still shining, still believing. You begin to understand something subtle but profound. This is not just a journey through space, but through belief. And the longer you stay with the caravan, the more that belief soaks into your bones. The landscape starts to shift again. The harsh Sahara loosens its grip, giving way to gravel plains, then slowly to sparse vegetation. The color green so absent it felt like a memory begins to flicker at the edges of the world. When a small grove of trees appears on the horizon, you could cry. One of the guards does quietly under his turban, and with greenery comes people. Villages become more frequent. Some have only a few huts and a shallow well. Others bustle with markets and distant music. In every place you pass, word spreads ahead like fire through dry grass. The king of Mali is coming. They say he carries gold in sacks the size of sleeping children, that his camels wear velvet, that he prays 5 times a day, no matter how deep the mud or fierce the wind. Most of that is true. What they don't say is how he listens. Mansa Musa stops to talk with fishermen in river towns. He asks mothers about their harvests. He watches school children recite from their slates. And when he gives, he does not toss coins like a showman. He kneels, presses a pouch into the hand of an elder, and says, "For your mosque, for your children's books." You begin to feel like every act on this journey, every footstep, every sentence, every breath is both human and symbolic. Musa is not just traveling to Mecca. He is building a road of respect behind him. Here's a quirky little moment you remember. At one village, a boy gifts Musa a carved wooden fish. Not gold, not ivory, just wood. Rough, honest. Musa smiles as if it's a diamond. He ties it to his saddle, where it bobs like a talisman for the rest of the day. That night, when the wind howls and the tents groan, he holds the fish in his palm before sleep. Historians still argue whether Mansa Musa's generosity was tactical, an investment in goodwill, or genuine compassion. But watching him cradle that carved fish, you're inclined to believe it was both. The towns get larger, the roads busier. You cross through Gao, a vibrant city on the Niger River, thick with trade and scent, musk and salt, cloth and copper. People here know Musa by name and by gift. They still sing about the time he gave a griot a golden anklet because her voice sounded like dawn. And dawn comes earlier now. The air is softer, the light not so cruel. You sense Mecca is no longer a distant idea. It's a shape forming just beyond the curve of the earth. One day the caravan pauses at a high point, overlooking a wide, fertile valley. Musa dismounts. No words. He simply gazes long and still. You do the same. Below, a small town sleeps in the sun. Children chase goats. Smoke drifts from cook fires. And above it all, a minaret pierces the sky. Musa says quietly, "Each village is a verse." You ask, of what poem? He smiles, still writing it. At this stage of the pilgrimage, your muscles ache in places you didn't know could hurt. Your clothes are faded, your sandals patched. And yet you've never felt wealthier, because you are learning the unspoken value of endurance and of attention. There's an old saying among desert traders: the rich man is the one who can afford to listen. Musa listens every single day, and you're starting to listen too. You leave that fertile valley behind with the taste of wood smoke still clinging to your tongue, and the memory of Musa's quiet words echoing behind your ribs. The road flattens again, less dramatic than the Sahara, less lush than the riverside towns, but no less significant. Because now the caravan enters territories where kings are not unknown, but Mansa Musa is. And that changes the game. See, in Mali, Musa is a son. He walks and the world turns toward him. But out here in these lands, edging toward Egypt, the light bends differently. Respect must be earned anew. Titles don't stretch as far as borders. It's a lesson in humility and politics. You pass through oases where small chieftains come to meet the famed traveler. Some bring tokens, dates, goats, simple cloth. Others bring questions. Are the gold rumors true? Will he give? Will he conquer? You hear murmurs in marketplaces, hushed comparisons to sultans, and whispers that Musa might be more myth than man. But then he arrives, calm, towering, impossibly dignified, and he doesn't have to say much. Just a glance, a blessing, a prayer in perfect Arabic, and like that, doubts fall away like dust from a robe. Still, there are challenges. One night at a large oasis settlement, a local noble refuses to host the caravan unless Musa pays double the usual tribute. The guides tense, the soldiers murmur, even the camels seem on edge. But Musa, he smiles, pays it, and adds a silk scarf for the noble's wife. The next morning, as the caravan departs, the noble stands at the edge of the path, holding a jug of milk and a date cake, both trembling in his hands. He bows low, not because he lost, but because he learned. Historians still argue whether Musa's legendary generosity was always wise. After all, a traveler who gives too freely might become a target. But Musa didn't just give blindly, he gave as a tactic of presence, to disarm, to endear, to teach. Now here's your quirky detail for the night in one town. After Musa gifts a local mosque a new bronze door, a rooster walks straight through it during the dedication. No hesitation, just struts inside like he owns the place. The villagers laugh. Musa laughs too, and someone swears the rooster has been guarding the door ever since. And so the caravan continues bigger now. It has become a myth in motion. Stories travel faster than footprints. By the time you reach the edges of Egypt, you are legend. And you feel it in the air, in the way people line the paths just to glimpse the procession. Children wave dried palm fronds. Traders kneel. Beggars weep. The Egyptian border isn't just a line on a map. It's a checkpoint of history. You pass into the Sultanate with new gravity. Musa knows this is the beginning of a very public chapter. Cairo awaits. Diplomats await. The world is watching. You watch him as he rides. His posture is the same. His robes a bit more ceremonial, perhaps, but his face is unchanged, composed, quietly amused. You wonder how he feels inside, if his heart is pounding, if he misses home, if he fears saying the wrong word to the wrong man in the wrong room. But he offers no sign of tension. Instead, that night at camp, he sits beneath the stars and plays a reed flute. Soft, meandering notes that curl into the desert air like steam. You sit nearby, eyes closed, listening. And in that moment, you're not a member of a gold-laden pilgrimage, not part of a historical moment. You're just someone resting in the company of a man who understands that grace is louder than power. The next day, the gates of Cairo rise in the distance. Golden towers, broad streets, minarets like exclamation marks in a holy sentence. You are here. And the city is already whispering. You enter Cairo not as a stranger, but as a procession. The gates are already ajar. Word of the golden pilgrimage arrived days ahead of you, carried by desert merchants and dazzled scouts. And now the people flood the streets, not just to see the gold, though there's plenty of that, but to see you, or rather to see him. Mansa Musa. To the Cairenes, he is an enigma from the west, cloaked in silk and trailing wealth like stardust. They've heard the tales of camels with gold-dusted saddlebags of a king who prays 5 times daily without fail of gifts too large to carry. And now here he is, riding past the mosque, past the spice stalls, under the watchful gaze of the Mamluk elite. And you're walking just behind the musicians. You smell cardamom roasted meat and something faintly chemical incense, burning too close to velvet. You feel the eyes on your skin. Cairo is watching, but Mansa Musa does not flinch. His gaze is steady, almost distant, like the city is an echo of something he already imagined and prepared for. Every step of his horse seems choreographed, not pompous, just precise. Then come the gifts. He distributes them without ceremony. Pouches of gold to mosque leaders, gilded Qurans to scholars, silk bolts to local governors. No fanfare, no long speeches, just generosity like breathing. He gives because it's part of his being, not his branding. Historians still argue whether Musa's spending in Cairo destabilized the economy or enriched it. Gold flooded the markets, prices bent. Some say he caused inflation for a decade. Others argue that his influence brought wealth in other ways: trade alliances, prestige, spiritual connection. But all you know walking these streets is that nothing feels stingy. Cairo shimmers with opportunity. For a moment the city and Musa seem in sync, both radiant and slightly disbelieving. Here's your quirky tidbit in the spice market. A local child points to one of Musa's camels and asks his father, "Is that the one that sneezes diamonds?" The father chuckles and replies, "Only on Fridays?" Later you overhear 2 beggars arguing over whether Musa can fly. Cairo loves a good story, and Musa has given it many. Then comes the meeting with the Sultan, Al-Nasir Muhammad, ruler of Egypt, descendant of Saladin, and known for both diplomacy and cruelty. The court is glittering, too glittering perhaps. The marble is cold, the hall smells like oil and old roses, and you notice something interesting. For all the ceremony, it feels more nervous than grand. Because Musa, though a guest, enters like an equal. He bows, yes, he utters the required blessings, but he does not lower his voice or avert his eyes. He speaks Arabic fluently, quoting the Quran with gentle precision. He listens, he nods, he thanks, but he never grovels. And this unsettles the court. In Mamluk tradition, foreign rulers often prostrate themselves fully, forehead to the floor. Musa does not. Politely, he refuses. "I bow only to God," he says. The room stills. Then the Sultan smiles thinly. The tension breaks. Historians still debate whether this refusal nearly derailed the pilgrimage. Some accounts claim Musa was nearly thrown out of Cairo. Others suggest the Sultan admired the conviction. What we do know is this: Musa stayed. He was offered palace quarters, He attended prayers, and he continued giving. You sleep in an outer chamber that night on woven mats beside traders from Mali, Cairo, and distant Persia. The air is thick with candle smoke and soft snores. Somewhere nearby, you hear Musa's voice again, low calm, reciting verses. There's no gold in his words, just firelight and breath. You're not in the Sahara anymore, but somehow that voice brings it back, the wind, the stars, the rhythm of the journey. In Cairo, you have beds, you have baths, you have warm food that doesn't taste like sand. But part of you misses the caravan, because cities have walls. And Musa's story doesn't like walls. You wake to a chorus, not a song exactly, but the layered hum of Cairo's stirring coppersmiths, hammering donkeys, braying muezzins, calling from minarets like raised fingers of sound. Your bones feel softer after a real bed, but your thoughts are sharper, more restless. The city does that to you, and to Mansa Musa. It does something else entirely. Today is for scholars, not markets, not processions, not the gleam of coins or the dazzle of brocade. Today, the Mansa seeks the minds of Cairo. He walks to Al-Azhar, the famed university and mosque that's been humming with thought for centuries. Here, truth is measured in syllables and influence in footnotes. You trail behind, passing under stone archways and between columns where students press their noses to pages or argue over interpretation. The air smells of ink dust and old leather. There is no gold here, but somehow it glows brighter. Musa is led to a group of scholars. Men in turbans nod in quiet reverence, not for his wealth, but for his piety. He asks them questions, hard ones, about jurisprudence, about theology, about the metaphysics of divine justice, and he listens, really listens. Historians still argue whether Musa's interest in Cairo's scholars was political, religious, or simply curious. But what's clear is this: he took notes. He asked for book recommendations. He bought copies of rare texts, not to hoard them, but to bring them home, to build something. You hear him say it later over a bowl of lentil stew in a shaded courtyard. What good is a king who returns with gold, but not wisdom? That line sticks with you. Here's your quirky detail. One of the scholars gives Musa a tiny, fragile scroll. It's a prayer handwritten in impossibly fine script, no larger than your palm. Musa presses it to his lips. Later, he will have it sewn into his robes close to his heart. But it's not all solemnity. That evening, the court hosts a poetry gathering. There's spiced coffee date pastries so soft they vanish on your tongue, and verses that rise like smoke in the lamplight. Musa doesn't speak much, but he smiles. He laughs. And once, just once, he finishes a poem. Another man stumbles on, delivering the final couplet in perfect cadence. The room exhales. This is not just a pilgrimage anymore. This is a harvest of thought, of story, of connections. Cairo is not the end of Musa's journey. It is the middle, and he treats it like a seed bank, gathering ideas and planting relationships. You can almost see the roots trailing behind him, back across the desert, back to Mali. Some of his entourage want to stay here. You hear them whispering about the baths, the food, the music. But Musa is already thinking ahead. He asks the Sultan for permission to visit Mecca next. There's a pause. Even in a city as cosmopolitan as Cairo, Mecca is sacred territory, politically, spiritually, logistically. But Musa is persuasive. He speaks not as a guest, but as a fellow servant of God. His sincerity is his passport. The Sultan agrees. Preparations begin again. But it's different now, quieter. The gold is packed more tightly. The musicians grow fewer. Musa wears simpler clothes. His eyes are focused not on spectacle, but on sincerity. He's no longer trying to impress. He's trying to arrive. Historians still wonder whether something shifted in him in Cairo. Maybe the scholars' debates moved him. Maybe the poor in the alleyways sobered him. Or maybe the sheer mass of civilization made him long for something simpler. more eternal. Either way, he changes, and you feel it. The way he moves, the way he prays, the way he stops once just to help a child who's dropped a scroll in the dust. The caravan reassembles slimmer than before, but lighter too. You're not marching now, you're gliding. The call of Mecca is in your bones. One last night in Cairo. You lie under the open sky on the palace roof, too restless to sleep. Around you, the city breathes, lanterns flicker, cats dart across rooftops. A lull of voices drifts upward from late-night storytellers. And Musa, he's there too, sitting cross-legged silent. He doesn't look at you, but you feel it anyway. The next chapter is coming. The morning air feels less like wind and more like intention. You wake to a hush, the kind of quiet that hovers, not because the world is still asleep, but because everyone knows what's coming and wants to meet it with reverence. Today, the caravan leaves Cairo, but not with drums or dancers. Instead, the procession that once roared across the desert now flows like a river just before it enters the sea. Smaller, smoother, Mansa Musa has trimmed the excess. What's left is devotion. Even the camels seem to move more purposefully. Their bells no longer jingle in pride, but murmur in rhythm. Each step pulls you further east toward the heart of Islam, toward Mecca. You pass through oases you barely remember on the way in. Only now do you notice the dates growing wild, the sandals drying in the sun, the way dust clings to eyelashes like a final blessing from the land. Every detail feels lit from within. And Musa, he walks more than he rides. Yes, a king, yes, still flanked by servants and soldiers. But these days he moves on foot. He prays more often. He speaks less. You catch him scribbling something in a little leather-bound notebook, a rarity for the time. A sign he's processing something that won't fit into conversation. Historians still argue whether Mansa Musa's transformation was spiritual awakening or savvy PR. Did he genuinely seek humility, or did he know the eyes of the Islamic world were now upon him? Whatever the reason, the shift is real. One afternoon, the caravan stumbles across a group of Yemeni pilgrims. They're ragged, poor, carrying little more than mats and water skins. But when Musa greets them, he bows lower than expected. He calls them brothers. He offers them food. And perhaps more importantly, he listens to their stories. They speak of trials, sandstorms, lost family, stolen shoes, and he doesn't look away. Later around the fire, Musa says quietly, God sees not the robe, but the road. No one writes it down, but you do, in your mind. Here's your quirky tidbit. One night, a camel gives birth in the middle of the desert. It's unexpected and chaotic, but Musa halts the entire caravan for hours to allow mother and calf to rest. All life makes pilgrimage, he says. Let her make hers in peace. It's hard not to love him a little for that. The closer you get to Mecca, the more the air itself changes. It's like inhaling history. Pilgrims merge with your group Iranians, North Africans, Turks, traders from as far as India. And yet, in the swirl of languages and garb, there's unity. Everyone is here for one reason. You feel smaller, but not diminished. Like a note in a choir. Musa, too, seems to grow quieter with each passing mile. He no longer leads from the front. He walks among the people now, listening more, laughing sometimes, but mostly just being. You begin to understand. Pilgrimage is not about reaching Mecca. It's about becoming someone who should be there, and you're almost ready. The last leg is the hardest. The heat returns, water grows scarce. Tempers fray, some fall ill. You worry Musa might falter, but he doesn't. In fact, he becomes the still point around which the whole caravan turns. When a child collapses, he carries her. When a dispute erupts over rations, he mediates it with a verse from the Quran. When your own spirit dips, he notices and hands you a single fig. You've never tasted anything sweeter. Then finally the hills of Mecca appear. Not grand, not towering, but significant. Your heart stutters. There it is, the place the world turns to 5 times a day, the house of Abraham, the Kaaba. It glows not with light, but with memory, with prayer, with every footstep that's ever led here. Musa stops. Everyone stops. He weeps, not loudly, not performatively, just a quiet, broken sob that says, "This is why I came, not for gold, not for fame, but for this exact moment." And somehow you feel like you've arrived too, not because you earned it, but because you followed. As you take your first steps toward the city, toward the mosque, toward the sacred, you realize something strange. You no longer care how rich he is. You only care how he prays. You're in Mecca now, not just on a map, but in your bones. Every breath tastes ancient. Every echo feels like it belongs to someone who came here before you. The city hums not with noise, but with reverence. You step through archways that curve like the inside of a prayer. The stone beneath your sandals is smooth from centuries of faithful feet. You're not a visitor, you're a continuation. And yet nothing prepares you for the first glimpse of the Kaaba. You round a corner, blink into the sunlight, and there it is. A cube, yes, simple, draped in black silk. But it may as well be the sun, the moon, and every compass needle in the world rolled into one. People circle it like stars orbiting gravity itself. Quietly, constantly, you forget to blink. Mansa Musa weeps again, not in shame, not from sorrow, but from awe, from the sheer weight of presence. This is not about gold, or Mali, or legacy. This is about surrender. He walks barefoot toward the Kaaba, head lowered. You follow, hundreds follow, no one speaks. Here's your historical fact. The Kaaba has been rebuilt multiple times by Abraham, by Quraysh leaders, even by Muhammad himself. But for all its changes, the pilgrimage has always held one rule. You leave your ego at the door, and Musa, he obeys. He prays beside men in rags and scholars in silk. He kneels without guards. He sleeps on the same woven mats. He doesn't demand special quarters. He doesn't remind anyone he's king. In fact, he refuses any title except Haji, now pilgrim. But word spreads anyway. By the third day, scholars from every corner of the Islamic world have arrived to meet him. Historians, astronomers, poets, even a few skeptics eager to see if the Golden King of Mali is real or just a puffed-up tale. And they find no crown, no throne, just a tall man with tired eyes and a voice like calm water. They ask questions. He listens first, then answers carefully, and slowly something begins to shift. Musa is invited to share not just his wealth, but his knowledge. He lectures, he recites Quran. He discusses trade routes, salt taxation education for children, including girls. Scholars lean in, scribes take notes. Some even ask to travel with him back to Mali. Here's your quirky tidbit. Musa spends part of his stay sponsoring repairs to wells and buying scrolls from local libraries, not because he needs them, but because he wants to build one back home. A university in Timbuktu. You don't know it yet, but this moment right here in Mecca is the seed that will grow into one of the world's greatest centers of learning. Timbuktu will one day house hundreds of thousands of manuscripts. It will become a hub of science, art, and law. And it begins with a man sitting cross-legged on a rug, quietly asking a scholar how to store ink without mold. Historians still argue whether Musa's true goal was spiritual enlightenment or empire building via diplomacy. But what's undeniable is this: he left Mecca different, and he left Mecca known. There's a parade of sorts before his departure. Not the flashy kind, no fireworks, no camel pyramids. Just people, hundreds of them, lining the alleys to bow, to shake hands, to whisper blessings. Some slip folded paper into his robe, requests poems, even questions for the stars. He accepts each one. Before leaving, Musa performs the farewell tawaf, 7 final circles around the Kaaba. He doesn't rush. doesn't break stride, just breathes. And just like that, it's time to go. But something's changed. You feel it as you walk behind him. Through the gates of Mecca, the weight he carried in, he leaves behind. And in its place, he carries something else. Peace, a kind that can't be bought, not even with gold. The journey home begins not with fanfare, but with a soft sunrise. You rise early before the merchants, before the camels groan their greetings to the morning. Mansa Musa is already awake. He stands on a ridge overlooking the desert, cloaked in the pale saffron light of dawn. His face is unreadable. Not heavy, not light, just still. You know this version of him is different. He carries no arrogance, no spectacle, just intention. The caravan reforms slowly, familiar faces emerging from tents, and prayer mats sleep creased and sunburnt. But they're changed too. Mecca did something to all of you, smoothed some edges, tuned you to quieter frequencies. Even the gold seems less important now, and yet it's still there. In fact, the caravan is even bigger than before. Remember how Musa gave away so much gold that he destabilized Cairo's economy. Turns out Mecca wasn't much better. Prices ballooned, markets flooded, and somewhere between generosity and unintended inflation, Musa found himself short. That's right, he ran out of gold, a king, broke, which leads us to one of the stranger twists in this tale. On his way home, Mansa Musa borrows from Egyptian lenders at high interest, his own gold in a way coming full circle. Historians still argue whether this was a miscalculation or a flex of political humility, proof that even kings must kneel to market forces. Either way, the journey home begins in debt. But debt is not defeat. The return route is slower, purposeful. Musa isn't in a rush. Every oasis becomes a lecture hall, every resting point a mini-conference. He continues gathering scholars' manuscripts, architects. He recruits mathematicians from Persia, urban planners from Syria, even a few skeptical Greek translators curious about this Timbuktu place they've only heard whispered in port cities. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Mansa Musa's pilgrimage established formal diplomatic and intellectual ties between West Africa and the broader Islamic world, some of which would endure for centuries. And your quirky tidbit, he was so beloved by a particular group of Andalusian architects that one of them allegedly followed the caravan for 3 months after being told no just to beg for a second interview. Eventually, Musa gave in. He hired him to design mosques. Now picture this, you're halfway through the Sahara again. Sand as far as the eye can see. The wind sighs like it remembers your footsteps. And yet the caravan moves slower, not from fatigue, but from reflection. You're not the same people who left Mali. You're pilgrims now. The horses are quieter, the nights deeper. Someone sings a lullaby at a campfire one night that makes even the camels pause chewing. You begin to understand that the journey home is sometimes more sacred than the journey out. Because now you have to carry the why back with you. It's one thing to leave searching. It's another to return transformed. Mansa Musa seems aware of this. He gives fewer speeches. He smiles more. He prays in smaller circles. And sometimes at night you hear him speaking softly to the stars, not asking for direction but offering thanks. He almost dies once. A sandstorm, sudden, brutal. You barely have time to zip the tent before it hits. The whole caravan hunkers down. Some scream. A camel breaks loose. But in the morning, Musa emerges covered in dust, coughing and laughing. He says it reminded him that even kings must bow to wind. You carry that one with you. When you finally see the faint ridges of Mali's highlands on the horizon, it's like waking from a long dream. The green is softer, the sky more forgiving. Birds that once meant migration now just mean home. But Timbuktu is still far. The final leg of the journey feels like a transition between worlds. You cross dry rivers, stop at villages that haven't seen the caravan in over a year. People cheer, children stare, songs are improvised, and Musa, ever the balanced soul, waves but does not linger. His eyes are already on the city ahead. The gold-laden pilgrimage is almost over, but its echo, that's just beginning. The first thing you notice upon re-entering Mali is the sound. Not fanfare, not drums, but breath. The breath of the people. Thousands of them lined along the outer roads, standing barefoot in dust and dew, waiting, watching, breathing together. It isn't celebration, it's reverence. You ride at the edge of the caravan now, the city of Timbuktu drawing closer with every trotting hoof. And all around you is the living heartbeat of an empire remembering itself. The pilgrimage has looped back not to where it started, but to a newer version of what it left behind. You think you understand home now. It's not just a place. It's the people who kept breathing while you were gone. Mansa Musa enters not on a golden chariot or surrounded by dancers, but walking, staff in hand, clothes plain, face bare. The city goes quiet. Then someone begins to sing, a single voice, clear, hesitant like a bird at dawn. Then another joins, and another, until the streets are a river of voices, low, slow humming gratitude. Timbuktu welcomes him not like a king, but like a returned ancestor. And that's the moment history pivots. Because what comes next is not rest, it's reinvention. Your mainstream historical fact in the decade following his return, Mansa Musa turns Mali into a cultural supernova. He doesn't just build things, he rewires the intellectual DNA of a continent. Libraries, mosques, madrasas, centers for debate, translation houses, scholarship networks stretching from Gao to Cairo to Granada. It's not a golden age, it's a platinum one. Here's a detail textbooks usually skip. Musa doesn't name most of these institutions after himself. He names them after ideas. The House of Understanding, the Garden of Morning Light, the Circle of Listening, titles that feel more like poems than plaques. And your fringe tidbit. One of the architects he brought home, yes, that Andalusian guy from earlier, sketched the entire city grid of Timbuktu, using only palm leaves, goat milk ink, and a bird's eye memory from the sand dunes. Those diagrams became blueprints not just for buildings, but for how to think inside them. Still, not everything is smooth. Historians still argue whether Musa's vision overwhelmed the traditional structures of Mali. Some griots whisper that local customs were sidelined, that sacred groves became mosques, that some elders felt erased in the rush to modernize. Was it progress or imperial ego renewal or soft colonization? You walk the edge of that question, because while Musa funded religious tolerance, paying imams of varying schools, inviting debates without censorship, he also taxed lands with new structures, enforced Arabic in scholarly spaces, and shifted power towards scholars over warriors. Balance, it seems, is hard to hold at scale. But you see something else, too. You see students arriving barefoot from the Sahel, clutching scraps of parchment, hungry for astronomy, medicine, poetry. You see women debating hadith on balconies. You see children learning to write both Mande and Arabic, side by side on the same sand-smoothed tablet. You see a city opening like a palm. At night you stroll through its streets and feel it hum, not from gold, but from thought. Ideas rustle through the alleys like wind through millet. New words are invented daily. Languages blend. One boy is translating Persian medical texts into Songhai using Wolof metaphors. Another girl memorizes ancient Egyptian mathematics and teaches it with pebbles. And through it all, Musa watches. He is older now, thinner, but brighter in some way. Like a coal glowing slow instead of a fire raging fast. He sits at lectures he funds, eats with scholars he hired, sometimes argues with them, and sometimes concedes. You wonder if this was his true Mecca all along, not a place of pilgrimage, but a city of minds. One night you pass by his courtyard. He's sitting under a fig tree, alone, writing something, not a law, not a proclamation, but a poem. You can't read the lines, but you feel them. You feel them because they are yours, too. This journey has changed you, and it is changing everything around you. You sleep that night with ink-stained fingers and a brain buzzing like a wasp's nest, not with noise, but with new knowing. You are no longer part of a story. You are part of a library, and you've just arrived at the first shelf. The thing about libraries in Mali, they breathe. They inhale sand and exhale centuries. You don't notice it at first. You think it's just the dust, the way the air feels heavier when you step inside. But the deeper you wander, the clearer it becomes. These rooms are alive. Pages crackle like old bones. Wooden shelves creak like ribs expanding. The scrolls lean into each other like old friends telling secrets in the dark. You've never seen so many books, and none of them are bound like modern books. They're stitched by hand, copied with reed pens and lamp-black ink wrapped in goat hide, tucked between palm fronds, stacked like treasure inside carved cedar chests. They are heavy not just in mass, but in memory. This is the real gold of Mansa Musa's Mali, the wisdom, and you are knee-deep in it. You pull out a manuscript. The ink is brown, now aged from black, and the calligraphy curls like smoke. It's a treatise on ethics, another one on the stars. Over there, someone is whispering verses of Rumi. In a corner, a boy is translating Greek philosophy using Bambara proverbs. Across the hall, a woman is leading a seminar on the medicinal uses of desert herbs. You don't speak the language of every book, but you understand the tone, reverence, curiosity, playfulness. It's not about memorization, it's about interpretation. About conversation. Mainstream history loves to frame medieval Africa as a footnote, dark static waiting to be discovered. But here you are, in a room where 14th century scholars are debating planetary orbits with more nuance than Galileo, where theology doesn't silence science, it sponsors it. Mali doesn't just have knowledge, it has dialogue. Your quirky tidbit for this section. Some of the oldest documents here aren't even books in the traditional sense. They're collaborative sand drawings preserved through oral retelling and mnemonic chants. Students would gather in circles and draw entire star maps into the ground, then wipe them away, keeping only the memory. It wasn't destruction, it was discipline. Of course, historians still argue whether this intellectual explosion reached beyond the elite. Were these texts accessible to farmers, to women, to foreigners? Some say yes. Others say it was cloistered knowledge guarded like incense behind carved doors. But your experience says something in between, because you meet a grandmother who owns her own weather log, written in glyphs she invented. You meet a fisherman who consults an herbal remedy list, penned by his aunt. And you meet a teenage girl who has copied half the Quran in 3 languages just for fun. No tuition, no degree, just access. It feels radical, it feels ancient, it feels like something the modern world should have copied but didn't. You lose track of time here. Books become companions, scrolls become lullabies. You find one particular manuscript, a curious one filled not with philosophy, but with dream records, night visions, prophecies, entire journals of what students dreamed while studying, annotated with footnotes and cross-references. One dream about a flaming bird is linked to a real comet sighting 3 years later. Another mentions a lost city submerged beneath the dunes. And you realize this wasn't just a university, it was a spiritual engine. A place where logic and mystery coexisted without shame. Where scholars fasted before exams not to lose weight, but to heighten intuition. Where entire lectures were conducted by silence, with students meditating in a ring until someone heard the answer. You lie on the stone floor staring at the ceiling. There's no chandelier, no fresco, just shadows of flickering oil lamps and the faint scent of ink, skin leather, and sandalwood. And you feel it again, the breath. This library is breathing, not for preservation, but for transformation. You close your eyes and let it inhale you. You leave the library reluctantly, trailing the scent of old ink behind you like a ghost. Outside, the air feels raw and unscripted again. Sunlight too bright, voices too loud. You squint against it as if your eyes had been adapted to a more thoughtful light. But no time to dawdle. Mansa Musa is on the move again, and this time it's personal. You see, not everyone was thrilled by his fabulous pilgrimage. The golden generosity, the scholarly exchanges, the massive construction projects some rulers felt overshadowed. Others were just plain irritated. The Sultan of Egypt, for example, was both impressed and unsettled by Musa's wealth. What kind of kingdom could casually hand out gold on street corners and still have enough to fund universities? Diplomacy starts to get prickly. And Mansa Musa, he's starting to sense it. Remember how we said earlier that he wasn't born royal? This is where that fact matters most, because deep down he still feels like an outsider, like someone who stumbled into a throne he has to justify over and over again. So when other rulers start questioning his power, he doesn't get angry. He doubles down. He doesn't shout. He builds. Back in Mali, after his pilgrimage, Musa becomes obsessed with legacy. He commissions new mosques, not just in Timbuktu, but in Gao-Niani-Jene. And these aren't small mud brick huts. These are architectural declarations. One of the most famous is the Jingweriber Mosque, built in 1311, crafted from sun-dried earth and wood beams, designed by a famous architect Musa kidnapped, well convinced to stay after Cairo. He brings back artists, scholars, masons, and engineers. You picture his caravan returning like a parade of ideas. Blueprints rolled under arms, strings of prayer beads, scrolls, pouches of rare seeds, bits of marble, echoes of 1,000 conversations. Your quirky tidbit: there are rumors that Mansa Musa commissioned an enormous sundial, not to tell time, but to cast the longest possible shadow at noon as a metaphor for his reign. Whether it existed or not, the idea feels perfectly on brand. But legacy isn't just about stone, it's also about stability. So he restructures the bureaucracy, appoints governors with strict oaths of loyalty, sets up new systems for collecting taxes, not just in coin, but in grain, livestock, even proverbs. Yes, in some regions, wise sayings were considered a form of tribute. Historians still argue whether Musa's sudden infrastructure boom caused more stress than success. Was the pace too fast? Did it overload the labor class? Did it sow seeds of rebellion down the line? You won't find a clean answer, because as you walk through these freshly built cities, you feel both awe and tension. The stone is still settling, the walls still hum with wet clay. But beneath the grandeur, there's pressure. Everything is tied to one man's vision, one man's memory. And as the years pass, Musa becomes less a king and more a myth, walking around in real clothes. People begin calling him the Caliph of the Western Sun. Merchants claim that just mentioning his name in trade negotiations gets you better prices. Parents whisper his stories as bedtime tales. He becomes a mirror for whatever the people want: justice, wealth, faith, power. And the real Musa, he gets quieter. You imagine him standing alone atop a city wall, overlooking a river swollen with rain. His back is straighter than it was before, his robes heavier, his eyes deeper, but inside still the same man who once knelt in the sand and asked the sky for direction. Still the pilgrim, still the orphan, and slowly he understands the more you give away, the more you become an idea. And the more you become an idea, the harder it is to rest. But that's a thought for another night. Tonight the cities are glowing. The scholars are teaching. The children are reciting poems by lamplight. And in the center of it all, a man breathes in the silence he created. You wake to the sound of hooves, thousands of them, drumming on the dry earth like a storm with no clouds. No, it's not war. Not yet. It's a procession. Mansa Musa is on tour again. This time not as a pilgrim, but as an emperor inspecting his empire. You picture him seated atop a tall white horse, robes fluttering like sails, flanked by a sea of bannermen, scribes, judges, and spiritual leaders. His court stretches across the horizon like a rolling tapestry, and behind it all gold, always gold. Gold dust sprinkled onto roads before his arrival. Gold beads tied to the bridles of horses. Gold leaf Qurans passed to village elders. This isn't just showmanship. It's communication, a living announcement that says you are ruled by wealth, wisdom, and willpower. You pass through village after village. Some welcome the emperor with singing. Others simply kneel. But one thing is consistent wherever he goes, he listens. Musa has this habit documented in at least 2 chronicles of sitting with ordinary farmers and asking about rainfall. Not the kind of question a detached ruler asks, but a man who knows food grows where water falls and empires starve when the sky goes dry. Here's your quirky detail. Mansa Musa reportedly traveled with a personal rain diviner, a holy man who could supposedly predict droughts by watching how cattle swatted flies. Fringe science? Maybe. But in a kingdom where life hinges on the harvest, nobody questions a man who can whisper to clouds. Still, not everything on this tour is ceremonial. Musa is also putting out fires. Internal tensions are rising, especially in the eastern provinces. Local warlords are hoarding grain, minting counterfeit coins, even challenging Musa's appointed governors. You ride with him into a contested region, fields trampled by rival militias, village wells, poisoned children, too quiet. This is the edge of the empire, and the edge is fraying. Historians still argue whether Mansa Musa's centralization helped unify or destabilize these outer territories. Some say his grand vision neglected local autonomy. Others argue he preserved Mali by tightening the reins just in time. You see both. The villages that cheer his arrival are the ones with fresh wells and stocked granaries. The ones that turn away, they've been left behind. Musa knows this. You picture him at a campfire, staring into the flames, listening to advisors argue. One demands military punishment, another suggests appeasement. Musa. He just watches the sparks lift into the sky. In the morning, he chooses neither. He sends poets, not soldiers. Bards trained in the capital arrive with nothing but drums and stories, legends of the empire's glory sung in the dialect of the rebels. Within weeks, the unrest cools. Grain returns to market. The warlords sign peace oaths, not because they're threatened, but because they've been woven back into the story. You sit there quietly, stunned. What kind of ruler disarms rebellion with metaphor? But Musa isn't trying to be clever. He's trying to survive the long game. He knows the sword can silence a man, but only a story can silence his son. And Musa wants Mali to outlive his bones. So the tour continues, through marshland and mountain, through salt mines and savanna. At every stop he plants a tree or funds a school, or blesses a marriage between rival clans. Each act a thread in the quilt of empire, each thread holding a promise. This land remembers you, and the land seems to answer. The rains fall more predictably, the herds grow, trade routes stabilize. Timbuktu hums with activity, markets overflow with fabrics, spices, rare books, and bundles of dried fish. The city becomes a map with a heartbeat, and you start to feel it too. Not just the wealth or the awe, but the sheer architecture of care behind it all. This isn't just governance, it's storytelling, ritual, faith layered over policy, art braided into law, and at its center, a man who still wears sandals more often than boots, a man who never forgets what it means to walk. You settle into the rhythm of the journey, rocking between Camel's Gate and council meetings, between village songs and diplomatic whispers. It's exhausting, it's beautiful, it's alive, and just when you think it might never end, you see the outline of Niani again, the capital, the place where all things began and all things must return. You arrive in Niani to fanfare so loud it feels like thunder in your chest. Drums echo from the hillsides. Dancers whirl in robes of indigo and saffron, their bare feet pounding a dusty rhythm that predates memory. Elders chant blessings, children throw petals, trumpets fashioned from ivory and bronze scream joy into the sky. But Mansa Musa, he just smiles. A small, tired smile, less a celebration, more a homecoming. Because Niani isn't just a capital, it's his capital. The city he expanded, beautified, shielded from drought and descent. It's his anchor, and after months of travel, it welcomes him like a long-lost son. You follow him through the streets. Every corner tells a story. There's the mosque he rebuilt in polished mud brick and gold-trimmed wood, the school where his scribes translate Arabic manuscripts into Songhai, the narrow market lane where his wife once bought saffron and silver bracelets. Every inch of Niani whispers, Musa was here. But something feels different now. The crowds cheer, yes, but their eyes search. They look at Musa a beat longer than usual, as though they sense something has changed. You see it too. He walks a little slower, listens more carefully, lingers on faces. When a merchant's daughter hands him a mango, he holds it like a sacrament. He's not sick, just aware that he's become the kind of legend whose shadow might one day crush the people he meant to raise. Here's a curious fact most history books skip in his final years. Mansa Musa reduced his public appearances dramatically. Some said he was busy building. Others claimed he was training a successor. But the palace guards told a different story, that he often sat alone in the prayer hall, watching the dust float through stained light, whispering names no one else knew. Names of people long gone. Maybe he was asking permission to leave. Historians still argue whether Musa died in Niani or during another expedition, whether he passed the crown peacefully or amid quiet turmoil. The documents disagree. The griots soften. The truth, as always, hovers between ink and silence. But you witness something even better than an ending. You witness preparation. One afternoon, you see him meet with his sons, not just his heir, but all of them. They don't talk of borders or taxes or treaties. They talk about the stars, about sand dunes that sing when wind moves over them just right, about what it means to leave behind something worth repeating. He tells them, an empire is not the land. It is how the land is remembered. And then he gestures to the horizon. There's a temple being constructed there, half-finished scaffolding still clinging like a spider's web. It's not grand, just a quiet place designed for prayer and poetry. He tells them it's for the future. Build nothing, he says, that doesn't help someone pray or read. You can't tell if it's a command or a plea, but the sons nod. And you realize the torch is passing, not in a ceremony, not with trumpets, but in conversation, in stillness. That evening, Musa sits outside, the palace legs folded under him, eating dates from a rough clay bowl. You sit nearby. No one speaks. The sun dips low, birds return to their trees, and for a moment the richest man in history looks unburdened, like a king who has finally placed every stone where it belongs. The night after Musa's quiet gathering with his sons, the palace shifts, not dramatically. There's no funeral procession, no lightning strike, no sword raised high with a cry of rebellion or loyalty. Just softer voices, fewer guards, a sense of breath being held. You walk the halls, and even the stone feels stiller. Mansa Musa has not announced anything, not yet. But the people sense what history will later confirm: a chapter is ending. Or perhaps it already ended sometime between a mango offered by a girl and the setting sun beside a half-built prayer house. The royal court doesn't dissolve, it pivots. Meetings are shorter now. Ministers defer more often to Musa's eldest son, Magan. His signature appears beside the emperor's on trade documents and letters to Cairo. Slowly, publicly, unmistakably, power is flowing like the Niger River, gently then all at once. And Musa, he is preparing to vanish, not literally, but symbolically, spiritually. He walks the gardens more. He speaks to scholars rather than generals. He studies maps, yes, but they're celestial ones. Charts of stars and eclipses, not borders or caravans. You catch him once tracing constellations with his finger in a bowl of water. He says, "This is how you travel without moving." You don't know if he means astronomy or something else entirely. Now, here's where it gets murky. Historians diverge wildly on Musa's final act. Some claim he died in 1332. Others push that date years later. Some say he abdicated. Others insist he ruled until the last breath. And still others think he didn't die at all, but wandered east to find a forgotten well once visited by Abraham himself. But here's what we do know. He left behind a Mali that was larger, richer, more educated, and more globally respected than any other empire in sub-Saharan Africa at the time. He seeded libraries, mosques, and mythologies. He made Timbuktu a word that still lives on in schoolchildren's daydreams. And he destabilized gold markets so thoroughly during his Hajj that prices didn't fully recover for over a decade. That's impact. And now, with all that legacy humming softly behind him, Musa does what almost no ruler in history has done. Without war, scandal, or disease pushing him, he lets go. He lets go of power. One morning you wake before dawn and find the emperor. Know the man kneeling alone beside a fire. No guards, no attendants. Just one small flame and the gentle scribble of his pen on a scrap of palm leaf. He's copying a poem. You peek closer. It's not about conquest, not even about God. It's a love poem. I carry your light inside me like a flame that does not burn, only warms. He smiles without looking up. It was written by a sailor who never touched land again. That's how you understand it. He is not retreating. He's sailing elsewhere. Soon after he disappears from daily life entirely. A room in the palace is left undisturbed, its door never locked but never entered. Some say he died there quietly. Others say he left for Mecca again, seeking some deeper silence. No trumpets. No throne room final speech, just stillness. And that's how the legend of Mansa Musa ends. Not in marble, but in moonlight. You wake to whispers in the market, not rumors of war, not scandal, just one name, Magan. He's Musa's son, the newly crowned Mansa of Mali, and you feel the shift before anyone says a word. The guards wear newer uniforms, the royal seals bear fresher ink. But more than that, the air carries something different, an uncertainty thick as dust after rain. Because here's the catch, following a legend is always a cursed gig. Magan steps into a pair of shoes so large they still echo. You watch him at his first public address. He stands tall, wrapped in the empire's finest indigo robes, but his voice wavers not with fear, but with awareness. Every eye is measuring him against a father who turned cities into myths, and myths into policy. Still, he speaks clearly, gratefully, with restraint. He announces no new conquests, no radical changes, just a quiet pledge to continue his father's legacy. Protect the scholars, preserve the trade routes, honor the faith, and never let the rivers run empty of song or coin. It's dignified, thoughtful, and perhaps a little too cautious. Because here's what historians debate. Was Magan capable, or merely polite? The records from this period are frustratingly sparse. Some chronicles suggest that Magan maintained stability, for a time, kept the merchants happy, the scholars funded the army, respectful. Others claim he was quickly overshadowed by internal struggles, possibly even rivals within his own bloodline. What is clear is this Mali doesn't expand under him. It coasts. For the first time in decades, gold caravans travel the same roads without multiplying. Timbuktu still shines, but the shine is from lamplight, not new construction. You feel the weight of stewardship, not innovation, pressed down on Magan's rule. And then comes the whisper, not the kind that fills taverns, the kind that silences them. It begins with a distant province Gao. Trade routes falter, a cousin disappears. A minor rebellion smolders and is smothered quickly, but not without scars. You watch Magan's face harden in meetings. His patience thins. The sparkle that once mirrored his father's eyes now dims into quiet calculation. And still, no bold moves. The empire's wealth is immense, but it's no longer expanding. And in empires, stagnation can feel like rot. Mali under Musa felt like a drumbeat. Under Magan, it begins to sound like an echo. Here's a quirky historical footnote. A few maps made by European cartographers during this era continue to depict Mansa Musa even posthumously with gold in hand and crown atop his head, not Magan. Almost like the sun didn't stick in the Western imagination at all. That's legacy for you. It's not something you inherit. It's something you survive. And Magan, he does for a while, but history doesn't give him long. He fades faster than his father did. Some say illness, others hint at palace intrigue. A few suggest he abdicated, overwhelmed by the shadows of Musa's accomplishments. Whatever the truth, one day, his throne sits empty. Another cousin, a distant branch of the Keita tree, assumes control. The court shrugs. The people adapt. The gold still flows. But something has shifted. Mali begins to forget what it felt like to rise. You rest your back against the cool stone wall of a half-empty caravanserai, one ear tuned to the stories of travelers who still speak Mansa Musa's name with awe, even though years have passed since his death. His pilgrimage has taken on a mythic rhythm told and retold with such grandeur that it begins to feel more like scripture than history. But you've lived through the echoes. You've seen the weight that legacy leaves behind. And now the empire changes once again. It's subtle at first, like the faint creaking of a great wooden ship, shifting direction in slow currents. A new Mansa sits on the throne, one of Musa's nephews, if the court rumors are to be believed. He's clever, more military-minded. He begins reinforcing the borders, tightening tribute routes, and appointing new governors with stricter coin ledger mandates. Some scholars quietly grumble. They miss Musa's indulgence, his love of intellectual debates, his deep-pocketed generosity. But merchants seem pleased. Business is steady, even if not booming. For a little while, Mali finds its rhythm again. Not glorious, but functional, efficient. Still, it's not the same. You travel south, then east, crossing dusty plateaus and green river valleys, and at each stop, people still speak of the golden days. Literally, coins bearing Musa's crest still circulate. Manuscripts copied during his reign remain locked in libraries guarded as treasures. Children in Jenne memorize his name before they even know who currently rules. But here's where things start to shift. Historians still argue whether this period marks a true decline or just a period of necessary contraction. But what you see is erosion, not collapse, just the quiet undoing of greatness. The Songhai, once a loyal subject state, begin to grow restless. Their leaders, bold and charismatic, start forging alliances, building up their own trade networks, hiring scholars, raising armies. You get the sense they're not just trying to survive, they're preparing to replace. And this time, Mali isn't ready. You hear it in the markets. Goods are getting pricier. Salt is scarce. Caravan attacks increase, and people begin murmuring about corrupt governors, unfair taxes, and bandits who seem a little too organized. You watch soldiers patrol the roads in tighter formations. Priests preach with more urgency. And in the palace, the drums echo louder, as if trying to drown out the uncertainty. You wonder, what would Musa have done? Then you remind yourself empires are not immortal. Even gold tarnishes. Even wisdom fades. Here's a quirky tidbit for your insomnia playlist. In a few forgotten corners of Mali, local griots still swear by stories in which Musa never died at all. They say he became one with the river, or that he wandered into the Sahara and turned into gold dust, watching over the empire with every sunrise. Wishful thinking maybe, but also comforting, because even as Mali's glory dims, the story of Mansa Musa only seems to shine brighter. In European maps, he becomes bigger than cities. In Islamic chronicles, his pilgrimage is the yardstick for piety and wealth. In West African memory, he is the sun in a sky full of kings. And you start to believe that maybe greatness isn't just about gold or conquest or even books. Maybe it's about what echoes when the palace goes quiet. As the wind picks up and the horizon softens into night, you think about what remains. Not the empire, not the trade, not even the manuscripts, but the story. Because as long as someone whispers it, Mansa Musa isn't gone. He's traveling still. You reach the edge of a dried riverbed at dusk, pausing beneath the silhouette of a once grand stone bridge, now half swallowed by the earth. The sky above you turns the color of charred honey as you trace the ruins with your eyes, imagining what it must have looked like during the peak of Mansa Musa's reign. Bustling traders, dust-kicked hooves, golden cloaks glinting in the sun, and beneath it all this river once roaring, now hushed. The silence feels like memory itself. You continue on foot past mud brick villages where elders still speak Arabic with Timbuktu cadences, past date palms that whisper to each other about times when the empire's name could open any gate, soften any heart. And in a quiet moment, perhaps your quietest, yet you begin to feel something new mourning. Not despair, not nostalgia, mourning. Because you now understand that greatness always costs something. For Mali, the gold brought envy. The pilgrimage brought attention. The fame brought change. And while the world marveled, the empire bled. Historians still debate how much of Mali's slow unraveling can be traced back to Musa's opulent display. Some call it soft diplomacy at its finest. Others accuse it of being the beginning of the end. The truth, like so many truths, is probably a mix. Too much attention, too many ambitions, foreign and domestic, and too little patience for the long game. You reach a crossroads, literally. One dusty trail leads toward the old Songhai lands, rising fast and hungry. Another meanders back toward the heart of what's left of Mali, Timbuktu, still brilliant, still defiant. You sit for a moment, the stars already blinking awake, and ask yourself where you belong in this story. You've watched Musa's journey, seen his glory, his shadows, his wisdom and flaws. And now standing here, you realize something: his pilgrimage didn't end in Mecca, or Cairo, or even in the return home. No, his pilgrimage became the empire itself. A moving thing, a shape carved by footsteps and trust by scholars and servants, by trade routes and prayers and risk. And now, long after he's gone, that shape is still shifting. Here's a curious little aside to ponder. While you get sleepy in certain local legends, it's said that anyone who tells Mansa Musa's story honestly becomes part of his spirit's caravan travelers, bound to wander forever, sharing pieces of a king who never truly stopped moving. You smile at that. Maybe it's true. Because even now you still feel the hum of hooves, the jingle of gold, the soft call to prayer rising above it all. It's not just history anymore, it's a rhythm. And somehow, without meaning to, you've started walking in time with it. You follow the rhythm across the Sahel where the wind carries stories the way ships carry cargo. Soft, almost shy, but insistent. And here in the fading twilight, one particular story keeps circling back the return journey. You might assume that after all the grandeur gold-dusted streets, Egyptian awe-Meccan blessings, Mansa Musa's return to Mali was triumphant. And in many ways, it was. His people greeted him with jubilation. His name had traveled further than any West African ruler before him. But grandeur comes with gravity, and gravity, as you know, by now pulls things down. Musa's journey home wasn't just a ride of celebration, it was a slow reckoning. The gold that had once dazzled Cairo was now more burden than bounty. Inflation had stretched its fingers into Mali's markets. Traders grew cautious, allies grew envious, and Mansa Musa, once seen as the world's richest man, was now also one of its most watched. He didn't return empty-handed, of course. With him came architects, scholars, poets, and books, hundreds of books. Some say thousands, their pages filled with medicine, astronomy, grammar, law. It's here, after the applause fades, that Musa begins the real legacy building. And you trudge alongside him. Not in the palace halls or under silk banners, but along the quieter paths, where a mosque takes shape from river mud, guided by an Andalusian architect with hands like a calligrapher's. You watch Musa kneel, pointing not to gold, but to the stars, because now he's obsessed with knowledge, preservation, the soul of empire, not just its shine. Here's a quirky detail. Most textbooks skip Mansa Musa. Personally oversaw the planning of the Jinguereber Mosque in Timbuktu. And while the bricks may be Malian, the measurements were inspired by tales he'd heard in Cairo of a sacred geometry that linked heaven to earth. He wanted Mali's faith to reflect the cosmos. Historians still debate how much of this was personal piety versus political PR. But what's clear is this Musa wasn't building for his ego anymore. He was building to be remembered. You pass through Timbuktu at dawn. The city smells of parchment dust and dates. Children carry slates to school. A call to prayer curls around the domes. The air feels heavy with something old and holy. And for a moment you imagine all the voices Musa brought here, whispering through the corridors of the madrasas, still echoing in every ink-stained margin. Then from a shaded alley you hear it, someone reciting aloud. Verse, maybe law, maybe poetry, but it's in Arabic, and the speaker is 12. This is the gold Musa was chasing all along. You sit on a low wall, your legs aching but your heart oddly light. You realize this is where the real wealth lies. Not in caravans, not in kingship, but in minds sharpened by knowledge. In hands that write instead of wield. In tongues that carry wisdom across generations. Mansa Musa the man will one day be dust, but the libraries, the learning, the invitation to seek and question and remember, that's what he really left behind. The sun hangs low as you drift deeper into Timbuktu's golden haze. The Jinguereber Mosque looms ahead not with menace but majesty. Its mud-brick towers are like raised palms in prayer fingers etched by time and sun. And as you pass beneath its arched entrance, you feel the cool breath of stone and shadow. Mansa Musa has aged. He no longer moves with the thunder of a conqueror or the swagger of a man who collapsed an economy with generosity. Instead, he walks slowly, deliberately, often in the company of scholars. He listens more than he speaks, and when he does speak, it's often in riddles, half poetry, half proverb. This is the Musa who rewrote the fabric of Mali, and not with war, with ink. You find yourself in the heart of his vision, Sankore Sidi Yahya, and Jinguereber, the trio of learning. Not universities in the way you know them now, but vast networks of scholars, manuscripts, oral traditions. Students traveled for months to reach these sacred schools, to sit cross-legged in dusty courtyards, to memorize astronomy under the stars, to argue law beside the well. Here's a fringe tidbit that'll make you smile. Some classes were so packed that students etched their notes onto wooden tablets, washed them clean with water, then drank the ink-stained rinse as a symbolic act of absorbing knowledge. Drink your notes, literally. Historians still argue whether Timbuktu's library system surpassed that of Cordoba or Cairo. Was it truly the most learned city of its time? Or has its legend grown in the retelling? Either way, the scale was staggering. Hundreds of thousands of manuscripts covering everything, from theology to mathematics, botany to satire. You peek into one classroom. An elder recites hadith while teenagers nod in rhythm. In another, a woman teaches grammar, her voice sharp and clear. Yes, women taught here. It wasn't common, but it happened. Musa may have been king, but the kingdom of knowledge had no gender. Outside traders from far-off lands argue over dates and salt. A goat wanders through a market stall unbothered, and high above, a hawk circles in the dusk, casting a slow, wide shadow over the rooftops. Musa spends his final years here, walking slowly, reading constantly, building quietly. His palace fades into the background. What remains lit is the mind of Mali and you. You walk those alleys lit by lanterns of memory. Each stone whispers of a scribe. Each breeze carries the scent of ink and ambition. You feel the shift. This is no longer a tale of conquest. It's one of conservation, of planting what cannot be spent. You stop by a wall where a child is practicing calligraphy. She pauses, dips her reed pen, and glances at you. Her smile is the same smile you imagined Musa had when he watched his first student read aloud. And just like that, you know gold vanishes. Knowledge stays. The rhythm of life in Timbuktu becomes your own. The shuffling of sandals across sun-baked alleys, the laughter that spills from clay courtyards, the rustling of pages in open-air libraries, all of it folds around you like a well-worn robe. You don't even notice the moment it stops feeling foreign. You belong here now, or at least a part of you does. Mansa Musa, too, has faded into the rhythm. He no longer makes proclamations from gilded thrones. Instead, he kneels in prayer, teaches in whispers, nods in agreement as young minds surpass him. This isn't a fall from grace, it's the final form of power. A quiet glow, not a blazing fire. But then his health begins to fade, not dramatically, not like a poisoned chalice or a fall from a horse. No, it's subtler. A lingering cough, longer hours sitting, more time spent gazing at the horizon, less time walking toward it. The physicians come. They bring powders, prayers, poultices. But even Musa, with all his gold, cannot bribe the body into immortality. Here's a quirky detail. Some say Musa kept a collection of rare herbs in tiny silver cases sourced from as far away as Persia. He would sniff them before prayer, claiming the scent sharpened memory and softened sorrow. Historians still argue whether he died peacefully in Timbuktu or further west in Niani, his capital. There are records, of course, some dry, some poetic, but the truth may be somewhere in between. All we know for sure is that sometime around 1337, the richest man in recorded history exhaled his last breath. But unlike most kings, Musa didn't vanish in that breath, because he left no great tomb, no pyramid, no jewel-encrusted coffin. He left ideas, laws, schools, a city whose name would echo for centuries as a symbol of unreachable wealth and hidden wisdom. You follow a quiet procession one evening, a single white goat leading the way, a group of men chanting softly. They carry no body, just a manuscript, wrapped in linen. It's symbolic, a burial of a scribe's final work, a tribute, a reminder that legacies aren't always buried, they're copied. You stand by the Niger River as dusk folds into night. The water reflects the last traces of sun like molten ink across parchment. And there you feel it, not sorrow, continuity, because someone else is already writing. Another voice is whispering a new beginning into old pages, and somewhere in a far corner of the empire, a child is being named Musa, not as a tribute, as a challenge. You rise the next morning to silence a heavy woven kind that clings to the fabric of the air. There is no official proclamation, no drums, just a shift, a knowing, the kind of hush that settles over a kingdom when the one who held its breath has finally exhaled. Mansa Musa is gone. And yet you feel no collapse, no panic, no chaos. Because the legacy he spun wasn't one of fear or sheer domination. It was one of knowledge, infrastructure, and interconnection. Like a river system beneath the surface, his work continues to flow long after the source has dried up. In the heart of the city, scholars continue debating theology in courtyards. Students still carry papyrus bundles tucked under their arms, tracing paths between scholars and shade trees. The market doesn't shutter. Gold still gleams on necklaces. Leather-bound books are still exchanged with the care of holy relics. Here's a curious little detail. After Musa's passing, the Jingareber Mosque is said to have become a kind of informal timeline. Visitors would come and touch its walls, listening to griots recite not just scripture, but stories of the man who commissioned it, how he built, how he ruled, how he knelt. Historians still argue whether Musa's successors upheld his ideals or merely rode the momentum of what he built. His son Magan took the throne but lacked the flair, the vision, the gravitational pull of his father. Mali remained vast, but slowly like a fortress. With hairline cracks, it began to shift. It didn't crumble overnight, but it was never quite the same. And yet the myth of Mansa Musa grew larger after his death. European maps soon marked Mali not just as a kingdom, but as a treasure trove. Arab traders carried tales of his pilgrimage farther east than Musa himself ever walked. Even modern economists 7 centuries later would try to calculate his net worth in today's terms, only to give up and label it incalculable. You pass through a room in Timbuktu's oldest library. Inside are scrolls wrapped in animal skin, fragile as ash, yet still legible. Some mention a man named Musa, some don't, but they all carry his breath in the gaps between ink. That's what legacy does, it seeps. You step out into evening again, into the wind that carries sand and song in equal measure. You realize you've been here longer than you intended. You were only supposed to visit, remember, but now the dust of the Sahel clings to your clothes. The cadence of Bambara phrases echoes in your head. The scent of incense lingers at the corners of your thoughts. You were meant to fall asleep to the story of Mansa Musa, but instead you woke up inside it, and now the story slows. You're still in Timbuktu, but the noise has softened. The shadows stretch longer. Gold seeps into indigo, and indigo folds into night. The mosque that once shimmered under a ruler's wealth now hums with something quieter and inherited reverence. Lanterns flicker in doorways. Sand slips through the wind like memory. You walk the alleyways with less urgency, no longer chasing a climax, only collecting echoes. The life of Mansa Musa, brilliant, booming, breathless, has narrowed to a pulse, a whisper you carry with you. You stop in a square where once thousands knelt facing Mecca. Now it's empty, but the grooves of their knees remain. Remember the gold he gave away, the scholars he brought home, the libraries he built brick by brick in a city that once defied paper. That wasn't just excess, it was intentional. It was belief in the unseen. An empire made of sand, yes, but built on ideas. And it holds, somehow, even now. You sit, just sit. You don't speak, you listen. Across centuries, through grain and manuscript, Musa's life unfolds not as a line, but a circle. The kind that loops back, that gathers you in, that tells you in a voice soft as suede, you're part of this now, too. You think of his pilgrimage, the deserts crossed, the camels heavy with gold, but also with purpose. The way his wealth bent markets, but his generosity bent hearts. The way he made maps redraw themselves. Historians still argue whether his story is one of empire or enlightenment, whether he was a king first or a servant of God. But as you stretch your legs in this story's last chapter, you find the tension no longer matters. Musa was many things, too many for a single scroll, too vast for a clean summary. And so are you. You remember the date palms, the scent of cardamom in tea, the scratch of linen robes. You remember watching him rise at dawn, placing both hands to the earth before the sky. You remember the way he walked not as a conqueror, but as a keeper. You lie back now. The sand is cool. The stars blink awake above the Sahel. And for the first time in a long time, you feel okay not knowing exactly where you are, because now you know who you carry with you, and so we breathe. The wind eases, the world narrows to hush and pulse. You lie there wrapped in the folds of a desert night, the breath of Mali still drifting across your skin. You can feel the hush beneath your ribs, something between sleep and reverence. You don't need more facts. You've had enough facts for one lifetime, enough dynasties and gold caravans. What you need now is softness, a tapering, a letting go. You imagine the horizon dark velvet and endless where Musa once turned his gaze and walked, not just for pilgrimage, not just for power, but for meaning. That's all it ever was, really. A search for meaning with a heavy purse and a heavier conscience. The city behind you doesn't disappear. It simply closes its eyes. The manuscripts in the libraries curl faintly under candlelight. The call to prayer becomes a murmur only your bones can hear. And somewhere in the dust of a forgotten corridor, a story waits to be read again. But not tonight. Tonight you rest. You've traveled across deserts, measured time in hoofbeats and stars. You've held the weight of history and let it slip grain by grain through your fingers, and still somehow you remain. Quiet, whole. The stars above Mali flicker like breath. You count them without counting, you name them without names. And finally, your chest rises once more, not with urgency, but with peace. The journey ends here, not with a coronation, not with conquest, but with stillness and the knowledge that someone like Musa once lived and moved and gave and kneeled and ruled. And now, you sleep. Thanks for being here tonight. If this story helped you drift or grounded, you somehow feel free to like and subscribe for more gentle journeys. And if you're still awake, just barely drop a comment with your location and what time it is. I love knowing where we've wandered together. Until next time, may your dreams be golden. End of script. Sweet dreams.